So I was curious, like, I spent a lot of time studying the founding and so forth in college, but I think Monticello in some ways was kind of an introduction of sorts to Jefferson. So I was curious, like, what was your impression generally of Jefferson, either the man or his presidency, before we went to Monticello? And then how, if at all, did it change after going there?
Well, I had a very positive impression of Jefferson since I was a school-aged kid in elementary school. I always saw him as a very progressive person, but I knew that he had a complicated history owning slaves. My impression became even more complicated going to the museum at the Monticello and also seeing it in general, knowing about we're now learning about the how interwoven the lives of slaves were with his own, particularly when it comes to Sally Hemings, and also even just understanding her mother's background, having children with the father of Jefferson's wife.
So explain that, like, give the background.
So in fact, Sally Hemings was technically the half-sister of Martha Jefferson, which I did not know.
So Sally Hemings, to give background, is basically, there were rumors right from when Jefferson was alive, and they continued for a long time. Sally Hemings was Jefferson's slave, who many believed became kind of his wife almost after and there was basically, a lot of people thought that he might have had at least one, if not several, children with her. It seems like there is a growing historical consensus that he, in fact, did have children with her. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, so it was definitely something that I didn't know before. Like, I didn't know how complicated the history was, how interwoven their lives were, and in general, just, you know, the life and work of the slaves who were on the plantation. And I think that obviously kind of made Jefferson more human, and I think that it's something that we all kind of have to reckon with. One of our founding fathers, and many of our founding fathers, I think 16, all owned slaves. So I think that's right. So I think the entire experience is quite enlightening, and I'm happy I got to do it. And I guess it remains to be seen whether the descendants of these slaves would be allowed to be in the Jefferson graveyard, where many of the descendants of Jefferson who are deemed legitimate are buried there.
So like at Monticello, we didn't know this before we got there, but in addition to the home and a museum and all that, there's actually a graveyard, and sort of in one corner of the graveyard is where Jefferson himself is buried. But what we were quite surprised by is that they're actually, I think this is right, tell me if I'm right, but they're basically like continuing to maintain and even expand the graveyard, and I believe people who are relatives of Jefferson have the right to be buried there. And one of the, I guess, lingering controversies is whether or not the descendants of the Sally Hemings line of the Jeffersons have a right to be there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an issue in the next decade, and how that will kind of play out will also